Hi everyone, welcome to Bits and Pieces for January 24. Scary. I remember thinking, gosh, how exciting it's the millennium, and here we are in 2024. Not quite sure how I'm coping with that, to be honest. But thank you for being here this evening to join me for our first Bits and Pieces live stream. It seems to have come around so quickly, what with Christmas and New Year and everything. So if I didn't see you in Hot Topics or our members session last week, then Happy New Year. I hope you've had a fantastic time and are feeling refreshed and ready to leap into the new year. So please say hello in the chat if you haven't already. Quite a few of you have already been saying hi. And thank you for letting me know you can hear me, because I don't get any feedback on that unless you tell me. So thank you very much for that. So hi to everyone. This live stream is open to everyone and it will be available on replay afterwards if you don't have time to stay, or if you want to watch it again later for that matter. I'm planning on leaving them up for a few months. I haven't decided quite how long yet, but it will be there for a while. And I fingers crossed, I think I've figured out how to keep the chat visible in the replay now. So if you're watching this as a recording after the event, please let me know in the comments, and obviously be aware of that if you're commenting, that it may well be up for people to watch in the replay afterwards as well, if I have checked the right tick box this time, as I'm still getting my head around all this technology. So let's see who's here. We've got David. Hi, David. And Lynn and Denise and Steve. Hi, Steve. And Marie and Lee. Hi, everyone. And the I'll Get What Games. And Susie. Hi, everybody. So thank you for being here. One thing I wanted to mention, which might be a note for the editor, have you been watching our trailer? I have the option to put up a trailer, which the guys sorted out for me. And we've had the same one for a few lives now. We had our Christmas one. But I'm back to the previous one where Flop is keeping you busy while I'm getting ready. So if you've been watching our trailer and you liked it, and you think it's time that the editor creates another trailer for us, then please let us know in the comments, because I think it may be, are you bored with that one, or would you like me to stay with that one? Do you want a new one? Do you want several ones that I rotate? So Marie says she loved it, only saw it once then. And Susie says she likes the doggos with the commentary. Well, they have to earn their money, don't they? They're busy doing something. Hi, Mr. Piggy. I'm hoping that they behave themselves today, because we're in a slightly different arrangement. I've been clearing stuff out. Stuff from behind me has moved. It may come back, but it's moved for now. And they are currently snoozing, but who knows whether that will continue, because there is no bed in the space I'm in unless someone goes behind me in the crate that's masquerading as a table. So it's possible I will get interruptions because things are not quite as they normally are. You know how that stresses greyhounds out, and Gandalf in particular does not deal with change. So who knows what will happen. So let's have a look. The Old Get What Game says he needs extra pizza for the new intros. Well, we could see about providing extra pizza for the editor if he does us some more intros. I'll have to have a word with the artists and see what they want to do. And Lynn says the trailer is great, but new ones every so often will be good, Mr. Editor. And Marie agrees. So I think we'll ask the editor to make us a couple more so you can see different ones in rotation. But it's just something to keep you busy while I'm getting organized to start. So as I mentioned last time, I'm calling these new lives Bits and Pieces. So in Hot Topics, the idea is that I pick a subject and we focus on that subject. For this one, the idea is to have 3 or 4 smaller topics each time that I will look at in less depth, obviously, or we'll be here all night. or morning if you're in New Zealand. And these might relate to questions that have come up in the comments on the videos over the last month. It might be issues I've come across in my work, or maybe things I've seen being asked on social media, because sometimes I do spot things on social media, think, that'd be interesting to talk about, but it's not enough of a subject that it would make a whole video. So it would be something to pick up here. So if you have suggestions of things you'd like me to talk about in Hot Topics or bits and pieces, please drop them in the chat, pop them in a community post, or ask questions on any of the weekly videos or shorts for that matter that you watch on the channel. And I do go through the comments, and if there are things that would warrant more of a discussion than I can respond to in a comment, then I could well pick them up in bits and pieces or Hot Topics. So before we get started on this month's subjects, I must give a shout out to our channel members. You can see them in the chat with the little square. The coloured square shows how long they've been a member, but they have a little square with a footprint are our members. So thank you all the members. You know who you are, and it's very easy to sign up. If you change your mind, you can adjust your membership up a level, down a level, or cancel it all together. There are 3 different levels. So if you're thinking of joining, do have a look at the different perks you get at the different levels and make sure you choose the one that meets your needs best, because you do get different things at different levels. So if you want all of the perks, you need to join at the highest level, but there are 2 lower levels as well. And if you'd like to show your appreciation for the videos and the lives and the shorts that we're producing for you, then another option is to use that $sign at the side of the chat box on my PC at least. And there's also a donate button on any of the videos. So if you'd like to make a little donation to help the guys out with their treat supply, then please do. They're more than happy to receive things in the post. So on that subject, thanks for treats this month. I have to thank several lovely people this month. So the gang have enjoyed some biscuits from Auntie Alison, and they also had some gravy bones from Mr. Piggy. So thank you very much, Mr. Piggy and Auntie Alison. And I'm still working on the wish list. I've nearly got it ready. It's been just such a frantic few weeks that I have not had time to launch it. So it is on my to-do list. Next week is looking better, and hopefully I will have time to do it. There just are not enough hours in the day at the moment. The idea with the wish list is there will be a number of things on there, but I don't want you to just feel, oh, you're just sending us stuff. So if you buy something off the wish list and you are the first person to buy us that thing, then we will make a short to show you the guys enjoying it or testing it out, depending on what it is. So I've put some different treats on there and some toys as well. So you will get to see them enjoying what you buy for them in a short, courtesy of my in-house artists and also of the editor. So I have added the option for you to send them something that isn't on the list, should there be something you want them to try out that I've not thought to suggest. You do have to buy something off the list as well. There are some very cheap things on there, so you could add one of those and top that up as well. So it doesn't have to stick to the list. Or of course, if you want to send a message on a video, or when I share the wish list in the community post, say, could you add this? And send me a link, then of course I can do that too. So let's go back to the comments. We have a donation from Alison. That is so kind, Alison. Thank you very much. That's going to buy the guys some nice treats. And what else have we got here? So Yogi What Game says it's a good job that the editor's working on a couple now, isn't it? It is a very good job. He's been very busy doing shorts for you, because it's just been so cold, so wet, so miserable, so dark. It's been 4 degrees, no, 4.1, I'm lying, 4.1 in my kitchen recently. So when it's 4.1 in your kitchen, you do not want to sit in the shed and record videos. So I've not been doing very much with that, and the guys have been all curled up in bed, so they've not been wanting to do much either. We had 2 days where they didn't even take their fleeces off. They wore them 24/7 for 2 days straight, because they were that chilly. So we have not been doing a lot of videoing. We're relying on the editor using stuff we've sent him before. Alison says the video is great. The editor's great. Thank you very much, Alison. We'll pass that on to Mr. Editor. And the Old Git What Game says, don't forget to bosh that like button too. Yes, please feel free. I always forget to mention the like button. And Mr. G tests more stuff. Well, he has been testing a few things. It's been so miserable these last couple of days. We got back today and pouring rain, so we had to do activities in the kitchen, which is not easy with a galley-shaped kitchen that's kind of wide enough for one greyhound walking up, one greyhound walking down. And where am I supposed to fly? You know, what do I do? Leap from counter to counter. So we've been scatter feeding in the kitchen and try not to trip over everything while there's pouring rain outside, because they just don't want to go and do anything outside, bless them. So not the easiest situation for trying to record stuff, but I did manage to get a few quite amusing clips of Mr. Floppy this week. So hopefully he'll be appearing in a short before long. Alison says you can buy a chicken dinner with the donation. Oh, I'm sure they'd like a chicken dinner. Don't tempt them. I don't think I should say that out loud. And Miss the Old Git What Game says, especially now his favourite blue ball is close to being an export. Yeah, it's getting very sad, that blue ball. He may have to, before too long, try the other blue ball. But he knows which is his blue ball. And I have what, as far as I'm concerned, is an identical blue ball, which he will turn his nose up at. So we might have a bit of a tricky situation when that ball dies. Oh dear, Mr. G. I don't want him listening to that. So let's move on to this month's topics. I'm going to have a slurp of my tea. I did pop in the description just an overview of the things I was going to talk about this month. Really just picking some things that just popped into my head, as things do. So the first of these is the risk of getting your greyhound stolen. And this is something I really wanted to talk about, but I didn't feel it was a big enough subject to make a video on. And I've only ever lived in a big city. I'm in Birmingham in the UK, which is the second biggest city in the country. And I've only ever lived in this big city whilst I've owned greyhounds. When I had dogs when I was a child, we lived in the countryside. It was very different, and they were just mutts, for want of a better word. And it could be different if you live somewhere smaller, but I was made aware of the risk quite early on in my greyhound owning life. And I've been very aware of potential risk of my dogs being stolen. There have been a few occasions when I've just been out on a walk, minded my own business, several greyhounds, and a car full of youths has pulled up alongside me, and they've started asking me about them. So they've wound down the window and it's like, are they for sale? How much do I want for them? And if I say no, where can they get one from? Are you selling them? And it's like, okay, bugger off. Excuse me, I shouldn't say that. Go away. I don't want to talk to you. Mind your own business. It's nothing to do with you. And I found that quite worrying, to be fair. You're just out in public on a little road, and suddenly this gang of youths is asking you about your dogs and interested in acquiring them. And what do you say to that? I always find in these situations, I get a bit lost for words. So it helps me to think through in advance. So in this case, after it happened the first time, I come home and I think, okay, that was difficult. What would I have done in that situation? And the answer I came up with is that I would try and make my dogs out to be the most decrepit, ancient, rundown dogs that anybody could have, and therefore very, very undesirable. So I might say they were really bad racers. Maybe they had to stop because they broke a leg. It's not true. They're really old. Having grey faces is helpful with that. People think they're much older than they are. So say, oh, this one's on his last knockings. He's no good for anything, mate. They're ill. They're really expensive, really slow, wouldn't chase. anything you can say to belittle your dog and make out that no one would want the trouble of owning them. Because the last thing you want to do is to inspire these people to come and help themselves. So let me know in the chat if you've had any problems with people showing too much interest in your dogs, but not in a good way. So I don't mean the very well-intentioned person who'd like to know more about ex-racers who you might persuade to someday become an owner. I'm talking about the person who might want to try and take them from you or come back again and steal them. So I was warned early on about the risk of them being stolen and why. I know at the moment you hear quite a lot about designer dogs and expensive breeds being stolen. And I think they're often stolen, sometimes on demand from what I've seen, but they're often stolen because they can sell them for a lot of money. I mean, some of these even basically crossbreed, cockapoos, cavapoos, anything with a poo in it, these sort of things that are basically crossbreeds, even they go for £2,000. So you are walking around, if you've got that type of dog, with a really expensive attachment. You know, it's like wearing lots of gold jewelry or diamond rings or whatever, a very desirable commodity that someone might actually want to steal. And greyhounds don't fall in that category, really. They're not going to be able to sell them for a lot of money, but you might find that they want them to use for illegal or unofficial racing. They might want to hunt with them to take them lamping, or even worse, they might want them as a bait dog for fighting. So there are a number of very unpleasant reasons why someone might want to steal your greyhound. I would never leave them unattended in a car for this exact reason. And I would definitely never leave them tied up outside a shop or outside a school. I remember speaking to someone who had relatively recently homed a greyhound and were having some issues. And I discovered that this person was taking the dog on the school run. The walk to school was the dog's walk. But of course, the dog wasn't allowed to go on the school premises. And rather than the children coming out, the teachers we expected the parents to go onto the school grounds to pick up the children, which is fair enough for the children's safety. But the person was tying their newly homed greyhound to the school railings while they went in. And it was like, oh my God, oh my God. So there is the risk of the dog being stolen. And they may also be quite frightened by this experience. I mean, can you imagine if you've got a dog new to a home environment, totally out, new world altogether, and they're tied up to railings where it's busy, there's cars, there's people of all different sizes, little ones through to big ones, there's push chairs, lots of noise, bustle, people or children running around, and they're tied up to a fence. That could be really quite frightening. Now, if the dog is frightened, they can panic, and if they're panicking and a child is touching them, they might bite them. So really bad for the dog, even if they don't get stolen. So maybe I'm a bit paranoid, but I would never leave mine unattended. I wouldn't even tie them to a lamppost while I went to use a public toilet or popped into a shop. Or, you sometimes hear of people saying, oh, they gave them to a stranger to hold while they went in. It's like, oh my goodness, you just don't know. And you do hope that people are all nice and friendly, but unfortunately, they're not always. So let's have a look at the comments, see what you have got to say about that. Steve says they would have got more than bugger off from me. Yes, well, there is that option. I think I was so taken aback the first time it happened that I didn't know quite what to say. And I did come up with a few slightly less repeatable options. And I don't think it is necessarily a bad thing that when I'm walking them, I'm usually dressed in a fairly neutral, gender neutral manner. I'm not exactly trotting along in high heels and a mini skirt, even if I owned those things. I walk quite fast. I'm usually wearing boots that are clumpy, maybe got a big coat. And I'm paying attention to other dogs or dangers that might be out there, but I'm not out with a view to interacting with people. So I tend to be on a bit of a mission when I'm walking the dogs. So I'm probably not the most approachable person at that time. So I'm not behaving in a way that would encourage anyone to talk to me, to be fair. And I think that's perhaps not a bad thing either in that situation. So Susie says that's exactly what I've done. Said he was a lazy beep and didn't chase and had his love plums removed. Yes, that's another thing. They may not realise they're neutered and might want to breed from them, especially if it is, I don't wish to belittle any people, but we do get a lot of travellers around Birmingham, and travellers often have lurchers. And of course, if you're going to create a lurcher, half of a lurcher is a greyhound. So they might be interested in acquiring greyhounds to breed with their existing lurchers. So yes, and obviously with boys, they can see whether or not they've got said accoutrements. With girls, of course, you can't easily tell. With the girls I've had, even if you look carefully, you can't always see the neuter scar a while after it's been done. So they might also think they can breed from them. And I wouldn't be surprised if people are thinking they could breed from them as to create more racers as well. People that are thinking in this sort of way don't necessarily know how the racing industry works and might be thinking they could get starting by acquiring a dog and just racing them. I have had people in cars stopping me and asking about them with a view to racing them. And it's like they don't understand that racing greyhounds generally live in kennels and you are not going to see them walking around the streets. By and large, if a dog is walking around the streets, it's a retired dog in a home, it's a pet. But a lot of people out there don't understand that. So people may well think that your dog could be useful to them as a racer as well. The OK What Game says Mr. G often has a poo in him both ends. Does he now? Yes. Susie says I only had it happen once on a lane in the middle of nowhere. A couple of Irish fellas, there's a surprise, asking lots of questions like, Betty's fast, is he good at chasing? Yeah, no, totally broken down. Broke his hop, never recovered, I think is a good option. And wouldn't chase is a very good option. You just have to cover their ears so they don't hear you. And Denise says to Steve, I have 3 of your prints hanging. Oh, there you go. Yes, I've been watching your, looking at your stuff on Facebook as well, Steve. Very lovely pictures. And Mr. Piggy knows someone who's just got a poop hat. Oh dear, that's unfortunate. And Lee said, I gave up public lavatories and bought a Shiwi so I didn't have to leave my dog alone. Well, that is the other option. I have to say, if we're on that subject, some public toilets actually say that dogs are not allowed, and that is most unfortunate. But there have been times when I've been on holiday with mine when I have gone in and left the door unlocked and the dog has well, if the cubicle's big enough, the dog's come in with me, especially if you're in one where it's like they're all disabled access sized, the dog can come in with you. But I've even let them stand on the outside of the cubicle while I'm in there before now. But it is a real problem, actually, if you're on your own. If you're on holiday with someone else, then the other person can hold the dog. But things like accessing the public toilet when you're on your own on holiday and you've got a dog is not the easiest thing to do, I have to say. Alison knows someone who had a similar problem with a Bichon, was interested in them. Yeah, it can often start off as appearing very interested, friendly with the dog, want to know more about them. And that can be a way of finding out whether they're worth stealing, especially if they get onto, are you local? Oh, yes, I live just up the road. Or which one's that? My friend lives just up there. And before you know it, they know where you are and they can come round and get the dog out of the garden. So, yeah, one doesn't like to be cynical and worried all the time, but I think it doesn't hurt to take precaution. And Lynn has been advised to put neutered on their tag. That can be helpful. I think the guys I've met wouldn't stop to read a tag. They'd have nicked off with the dog by then. And one thing I think is perhaps unfortunate in this respect. I put this down to the fact that greyhounds have grown up being handled by a variety of people. So, you know, you had the trainer, you had the owner, you might have had the breeder, you had the kennel staff, you have the people at the track. And by and large, I would say any of mine would have just walked off with anyone. If once the other person had got the lead from me, they would go with them, because that's what they've been used to doing, to just comply. So if the person walked off with authority, the dog probably would go with them. They wouldn't resist, I don't think, which is an artifact of their upbringing, I think. So I certainly wouldn't rely on the dog to fight back, apart from Jimmy, who hates strangers. So he would make it quite clear that that person wasn't coming anywhere near us. So sometimes Jimmys can be useful to have around. And Lynn says, service stations should have an outdoor toilet suitable for people with dogs, although I struggle with my 3. Yes, I think 3 at once. When I was having to do that and take the dog in with me, I only had the 1 at the time. I didn't try and do it with 3. The trouble with the outdoor toilet suitable for people with multiple dogs is if that is also a disabled one, it could also be using a radar key. So you wouldn't be able to get access unless you've got that key. So that can be tricky. And Mr. Piggy says, the poo pad is a poodle patterdale. That could be quite interesting. Patterdales are so cute. Why do you need to cross a patterdale with a poodle in the first place? I think there's just an obsession with crossing everything with a poodle. So, the tricky subject of making sure your dog doesn't get stolen. So, moving on from that, thinking about one sort of loss to another sort of loss, I just wanted to touch briefly, really, on the subject of losing your dog and the grief that we may feel as a result of that. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I think it's quite a difficult subject, but it did come up as a comment on the post, so I thought I should at least touch on it. And we can feel a huge amount of grief when we lose a pet, and dealing with that can be a very difficult thing to do, especially if the people around us don't necessarily get dogs or understand why it should be such an issue. It can be as hard as losing a person when we love that dog so much. And I think it really helps if you have people who understand how attached you can be to your dogs to speak to in order to help you cope with that. I think part of the problem is not just that they're gone, but that your whole daily life changes. I mean, today we got up at 8. Okay, maybe I could have got up earlier, but it took me till 11 o'clock before we had all, and we didn't even walk. This was just getting up, a bit of bouncing around in the garden, picking up poo, checking they'd all peed, having breakfast, clearing up, bit more bouncing, tidying beds, spraying with air freshener, eating my breakfast. Oh, and I did the washing up, and that took me till 11 o'clock. So if I didn't have dogs here, I'd just get up and eat breakfast and then think, now what? And if you were walking them every day, it's like, is it worth? I remember when I didn't have a dog, it's like, what's the point going for a walk? A walk is for the dog. Why am I bothering? It totally turns your life upside down because your whole day is structured around having a dog. So if you no longer have to care for them, then you have suddenly all this space in your day to deal with. And every time one of those changes comes up, like it's time to feed the dog. Oh, but I don't need to. Oh, it's time to walk the dog, but I don't need to. What shall I do now? And it really brings it home, because it's not just the fact they're not there, it's your whole structure has changed, and it can make you feel really, really empty, I think, as a result of that. Now, everyone copes differently with their grief, and there are no right and wrong ways to how you feel about it. And I do think that's really important, because it's not, oh, you should be feeling better by now, or, well, it was only a dog. Well, it is what it is to you, and that's what's important. Personally, I don't think it ever goes away. I can see pictures now of ones I've lost years ago, and it's mixed. You remember the good stuff, but you're also sad that they've gone. And I think the thing that happens is not that you forget them, not that you perhaps feel differently, but you just get better at living with it. And maybe, hopefully, you're able to make some peace with it. I've had some that have left me in very difficult circumstances. A broken leg. Well, I think it was a broken leg. I think he had a cancer that hadn't been found and the leg broke. We had 24 hours, very, very difficult at home in the middle of the night, stuck in the garden with him screaming. He couldn't stand. I couldn't pick him up. I was on my own, you know, and I rang the vet the next morning and said, you need to come and put him down, because there was nothing else to do. Maybe that could have gone differently. Perhaps, you know, could we have diagnosed it sooner? But there'd been no symptoms. How were we to know? You can always tear it apart and think, I could have done this differently. I could have done more. Perhaps if I tried harder. But it is what it is. And I think you can tie yourself up in knots by thinking about it. And you have to just think, okay, what happened. I have to live with that. But if this is something that you struggle with, it may be that finding help from someone who is qualified to help you is going to be worth a try. And there are bereavement counsellors out there. In the UK, the Blue Cross offers a pet bereavement service, and they do that by telephone. And I think that can be useful, you know, in the way, maybe you've not been in this situation, but I've been in situations maybe through work where I've had to go on long car journeys to a conference with someone, and they open themselves up to you and tell you all sorts of stuff they never would have told you at work, because it's somehow an impersonal situation. You're not looking at them because they're driving. And I think a similar thing can happen when you have something like this on the phone. It provides a bit of distance and space for you to talk. And it gives you access to a trained counsellor who can help you work through what you're feeling about your loss and maybe help you move a bit closer to making that peace with it. And it is unfortunately something we all have to face eventually when we bring pets into our lives. And while we do our best for them, we need to take steps to look after ourselves as well. So if it is something you're struggling with, please reach out and get help so you don't have to do it on your own. I have got, I think, 3 videos on this subject that came out of mostly, I think, losing Pip. Little bit about losing Millie. Pip was old. You kind of thought it was going to happen. I've got a couple of videos I did in relation to that and about coping. So have a look for those. But if you feel it will be helpful to talk to someone, it's well worth getting in touch with the Blue Cross to see if you can speak to someone on their pet bereavement counselling service. So you can just talk it through, because sometimes you just need to talk about it. It's not necessarily anyone what they say, it's the talking and being able to say it. And kind of the saying it helps you put it a bit straighter in your own mind. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know it's a difficult subject, but just thought I should address that issue that came up. So let's have a quick look at the comments, seeing if anybody would like to comment on that subject, maybe share something you have experienced or anything that you found that helped you to cope with that experience. That might be nice to share. So David says, thank you for talking about it. And the old Get What Games is still on the last subject. 11s is often 12s or Wednesdays. That's when it becomes lunches. And Jeff is here from Madeira. Wow, you've come a long way. Not the furthest, but thank you for joining us from Madeira. Alison says the video of remembering Daisy broke my heart. Yeah, Daisy was a difficult one. She went very unexpectedly. I was not expecting to spend what was meant to be my first quiet weekend losing Daisy. She just wasn't right. You know, sometimes you just know something isn't right. It was like, you don't want to get up, you don't want breakfast, this is not right. I think that was the Saturday morning. I rang the vet to come to the house and put her to sleep on Monday. So she was definitely a very sudden and unexpected loss at only the age of 9. So she was quite hard to process. And I wouldn't say I have necessarily processed it, but, you know, we have to keep going. And if the video with remembering Daisy is sad, then have a look at some of the earlier videos where we've got Daisy being a complete and utter nutter, because she really was daft as a brush, bless her, when she was here. And Mr. Piggy says, no matter how many you've had, it hits you so hard every time. I think that is really true. The ones that have been expected have hit me hard. The ones that have been unexpected that have hit me hard. I think the worst was the one that I'd had for the longest. He was with me 11 years. That was really hard. But then another one that I really struggled with, he was with me 3 days. He came to stay for, I was going to foster him because there was something not right with him at kennels. He wouldn't put any weight on. He was in dreadful condition. And I brought him home to foster him. I had him 2 days, and I spent a lot of that 2 days watching him breathe. I think that's not right. That's not right. That is not how breathing should look. Asked permission to take him to the vet. We got to the vet, and I'm kind of saying, oh, well, it's just me. I'm imagining things. I'm sure I'm just, you know, being over anxious. But no, he ended up being put to sleep because he had pericardial effusion, which is where fluid collects around the heart and puts pressure on the lungs. So when it fills up that space and the heart can't beat. And yeah, they tried to drain it and he just filled back up again. So, and he was 2, bless him, poor chap. So yeah, let's not get upset. So Susie says, this is what I dread. My boy is 11 and a half and I live at home. Yeah, definitely need to plan how you cope. It's really important to think ahead. Who can you contact? Have you got ways of picking him up? Have you got a vet planned? And I know it sounds a bit, I can't think of the word, ghoulish. But if my last 3 now that I've lost, I've had them put to sleep at home with a vet service that specifically deals with end-of-life care and euthanasia at home for pets, not just dogs, I don't think, but any pet. And I, these days, having gone through that myself and knowing how awful it is when you're in the middle of a crisis to have to ring them up and give your details over the phone, I would now recommend, and have done to people, recommend that you ring up if you're going to use something like that rather than the vet, at your normal vet, that you register in advance. Because then when the time comes, you just have to ring up, give your name, and you're on the system. They've got your address, and you just say, I need you to come tomorrow, I need you to come tonight, and it's done. There is nothing worse than giving personal details when you are in the middle of that sort of situation. So yeah, plan ahead. If they can't stand, how you're going to carry them, who you're going to call, how are you going to do it? Will you do it at home? Who's going to come and do it? Can your vet do it? Will they do it at certain times? My vet, I think at the moment they won't do it at all. I've got to get them to the vet. Some vet will come after hours, others will come at any time. It's all different, but it pays to find out in advance rather than when you're having the crisis. So Susie goes on to say, my life is built around, yeah, this is the issue I was talking about earlier. And I live under, yeah, it's really easy. I used to talk about this a lot when I taught yoga. Life exists now. The only bit of life that you can experience is now. But we spend a huge amount of time thinking about what's already happened and worrying about what is coming next. And we forget to enjoy the bit that's now. So be aware of a tendency to worry about what's coming and how that colours your experience of what is now. It's all about meditation is about. Jeff says, I want to say I feel for you. I've been there, had to say goodbye to 5, and it's very hard. It definitely is. I'm getting much better at planning and organising it, but it still does not mean I don't fall to pieces when it happens. Yehuva says we lost our first after only 7 months to osteosarcoma. I hated that we only had such a short time, yes. That's very difficult. I mean, they barely settled in at 7 months, haven't they? Bless them. But at least they got that 7 months. And Joy says, I lost my old girl at almost 14 and thought I could never go through that again. And now just sitting here looking at my new from October beautiful boy, and I love him to bits. Yeah. I have found by and large it helps me to have another. I'm not very good at getting rid of all the stuff. I tend to get another dog to fill the space. I've tried having fewer dogs. That didn't work either. I just get back up to 5. But we all do it differently. Sometimes you can go and kind of take vicarious pleasure in someone else's dog, or you can go and help at a kennels, or you could foster, or you could help something like the Cinnamon Trust, where you would go and maybe walk a dog for someone who, perhaps an elderly person that can't do it themselves for a while or is in hospital. You know, there are ways of helping other dogs without having to have one yourself if you don't think you can cope with the loss. And that is still beneficial for those dogs. Alison says her vet doesn't do a call out system. You can be registered with more than one vet, so I would be ringing around finding one that does. I have used now a service called DigniPets. They are based in the West Midlands, but they may well be similar things in other locations. And it is a most fantastic service. They basically come and do it all at home, very, very quiet and peaceful. And I think you have to look at it and think, if they're going to go, this is the way to go, because it could not be a better arrangement. So I would be looking now for someone that offers something like that. I can promise you, having to go up to the till in reception, in the queue, to present your card to pay for the euthanasia of the dead dog that's currently in your car is no fun. Been there. It's almost as fun as standing at the front of the queue and having to say, oh, I've got my dog's body in the car. She died at home, and being questioned about how come she's dead, which I had to do with my first one, which was pretty grim too, with the man standing there staring at me like I was an alien because I was in floods of tears, having just struggled to get my dead dog in the car and get a body to the vets for cremation. That was really fun. I would not recommend that at all. So Susie says, good advice. You're very welcome. I know it's a bit of a grim subject, but I promise you it makes life much better if you do it now, because then it's almost, you know, like that situation with meeting the Irishmen in the lane. If you plan in advance and you know what you're going to do, some of the pressure's taken away because you're no longer worrying about what if, because you've figured it out and you can relax. And also, when the time does come, and we know it will come, you can just kind of put it into practice and you don't have to add that stress into the day. Yeah, I'll put it in the comments afterwards. And then I can find the link to their website and put that up. I'll try and put it in the comments on the live, or I'll put a community post with it, Denise. They really are very good. And I know you're relatively local to me. They take them to a crematorium not far from Stourbridge, I think. And there's actually a remembrance garden you can go to, and you have all the usual services and so on. David says, good idea to pre-register. I had emergency lists together before that day comes. Yeah, it really does. I know when I did it, I got upset at the pre-registering. And I know that if I'd been doing it on the day where I needed them to come now, I would have really, really struggled to actually communicate on the phone. Because if you think, yeah, I'm fine, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, hello, I need to arrange it, and you just burst into tears. Well, I do anyway. So you have to try and do it when you can cope. And Yehu says, yes, we should be like our dogs, always present in the moment. That is so true. And that is one of the things that I think is worth reminding yourself about the dogs. Greyhounds live for this moment and they enjoy this moment. Even if they're fast asleep, they're enjoying this moment, aren't they? And they don't worry about what's coming or what's being. They think about what's now. And that is a really good way to emulate them. So Joyce says, I was fortunate that a vet and nurse from my vet practice came to my home. I mean, that is the best arrangement, but these days they don't, not every vet does. So if you know your vet doesn't, it's worth finding that out now. You don't want to find out they can't do home visits until you need one. Ask the question now. The old get what game? Yes, they were very good with Daisy, bless her. I had all mine cremated and they will be buried with me. Oh, that's nice. I've never had any, well, mine have all been cremated, but I've never had any ashes back because I kind of felt I would have a very long cupboard. I'd have to have a whole sideboard lined up with urns, and I kind of thought that was a bit excessive. Too many dogs, but a lovely idea. And Jess says, look for a group. There may be one in your country. I lost my last boy Tucker in California before moving to Portugal, and there's a group called Birch Bark, and I did a number of Zoom calls to help. Okay, that's worth looking into as well. There may be others. I only mentioned the Blue Cross for bereavement counselling because I know they do offer a service and the counsellors are trained. So it is a worthwhile service. And Alison says she lost her girl 2 months after her husband died. That's not, yeah, it's like life throws everything at you sometimes, doesn't it? Dear me. Okay, before we get to maudlin and also looking at the time, let's move on to eating a good diet that's only 20% protein. I thought it would be interesting to mention this because the general advice to owners is that it's not a good idea to feed greyhounds a diet that's high in protein. And 20% is normally the figure that's magicked up as how much protein to give them. Now, one reason for this is that the dog is resting, not working, and they don't need that high protein content in their diet. And this always reminds me of when I was a child, because when I was school age, we had horses, and you really, really could tell the difference in the horse based on what you fed them. So if they were resting out in a field, not doing much work, then if you did feed them hard food at all, you gave them a lower protein diet. So things like mash or sugar beet. If they were doing a lot of exercise, if you were riding them a lot, if you're going to competitions or things, then you increase the protein, which in the case of horses means more oats. And it makes a huge difference to how a horse behaves depending on whether they're having that low energy meal or a high protein meal. Difference to their behavior and their overall energy levels. And I've often thought that that's how it feels to me in relation to dogs. And I'd be interested to know in the comments if you've seen any changes or issues with your dog that might relate to the protein content. So specifically the protein, not, oh, they're allergic to this or they had really bad farts on that, but specifically things that could relate to a change in the protein content of the food. So the protein content is important, partly because of, is it a balanced diet? But too much protein is not necessarily good for dogs. It's not actually necessarily good for us either. I often hear of greyhounds with liver conditions or kidney conditions, and a high protein diet produces breakdown products when it's digested that have to be dealt with by the liver and kidneys. So if you have a lot of protein to eat, your liver and kidneys are going to work harder. And so if they have a liver problem or a kidney problem, then giving them a high protein diet is not going to help, because it makes those organs have to work more. And it can also upset the balance of some nutrients, particularly the balance between calcium and phosphorus, which also affects kidney function. So by feeding a high protein diet routinely, you could be putting more strain on their internal organs in a way that is not going to help them have a long and healthy life. However, a high protein diet goes hand in hand with high calories. So high protein is usually high calorie as well. So if you have a dog that needs to put on weight or needs to build muscle, then high protein diet is going to be a good idea. So if you've got a dog that's very skinny, maybe they've come from the kennels low weight, and then they often lose some weight in the first few weeks at home because of all the changes, then adding things that are high protein is a good way of building them up again. I mean, when Gandalf first came, it took me easily 6 months to get him halfway near a sort of normal weight. And I gave him an egg a day for months in order to try and boost him up, because eggs are pretty high protein. And for those who say, what about a raw diet? Isn't a raw diet high protein? Well, unless you're feeding them raw steak, actually it's not, because a raw diet should actually be balanced between the different nutrients. So yes, if you just go to the butcher's and buy a pound of mince, then it's going to be high protein. But if you buy one of those pre-prepared packs of raw food and you look at the nutritional breakdown, the actual protein content is relatively low, because there's lots of other stuff in there, bits of animal, that is not based on protein. So protein is essentially coming from the muscle tissue, and there's lots of other stuff as well, like bone and offal and things. So one problem that comes with having a high protein diet, or trying to balance that with a high quality diet, is that a lot of the high quality kibble is high in protein. And I remember when I was looking at different options some time ago, I was horrified that some of it has as much as 40% protein, which is really, when you say a greyhound should only have 20%, that's like double. Big difference. So it could be that you might end up buying a lower quality food, because that's what the only way to find a lower protein one. But I don't think that has to be the case. There are foods out there that are decent quality, but they don't have huge levels of protein. So it is more a case of shopping around and looking at the relative proportions. And I tend to stick with something between 20 and 26%. I try not to go over that. I consider that a reasonable range. And you can get some perfectly good kibble, things that have a single type of meat as the first ingredient. That's what I would class as a decent kibble. Excuse me, my cough still hasn't gone. So if you're looking at kibble, if it's got meat as a first ingredient, then it's at least okay. If it starts off with wheat and then goes on to vegetables and rice, and finally there's a mention of 4% chicken at the end, then I definitely would leave that in the shop. So as long as it's got meat of some sort as the first ingredient, then it's not too bad. And I would say you can go up to kind of 24, 26% as fine. I wouldn't get too excited about that. Not like, oh my God, that's too much. But I know we had I had some small bags of some of the fish-based ones, which mine adored as treats. But they were really, really dark, strong smell. You kind of felt it was quality stuff, but it was 40% protein. And I did actually try feeding it in meals, and they all got upset tummies. So we went back to using it as treats. So one way to address this, if you want to use a particular type of kibble that is scarily high protein, would be to add something else. So you can get some quite decent mixers. I had a really nice one for Gandalf when he'd had so many upset tummies, and I had to have something that was low fat and low protein. I bought a mixer because mixers generally have less in the way of nutritional content than complete foods. So I found a mixer that was lower protein, low fat, and used that. So if you can find a nice mixer, you could mix that in with your high protein kibble. So if you do it 50%, your 40% protein kibble has just become 20% protein in the actual bowl that's mixed up. The other option would be to buy some wet food, some tinned food, because these tend to be lower protein by weight. So an example might be to have chappy in tins, which is something like 5% protein, 6% protein. It's pretty low protein. And then a high protein kibble. But if you mix the two together, again, you reduce the overall protein content of what's in the bowl. So that is another way of using a higher protein content kibble, if that's what your dog likes or that's what you want to use, without ending up feeding too high protein overall for the day. So it's just my thought on that. It's, you know, low protein does not have to be low quality, and higher protein can be made lower protein. It depends on what you serve it with, I suppose, in a nutshell. So let's have a look if anyone had any thoughts on that in the comments. So any thoughts on that, share them now, and then we'll move on. I have one more little topic for today. So Yehuva says, we fed our foster a high protein kibble because she was so skinny. Yes, very sensible. Agitated all the time and switched to normal kibble, she got better. Yeah, that's a bit like the horses who've had their oats. I mean, it's a saying, isn't it? I can't remember what it is, but there is some saying that relates to horses and oats as meaning kind of pepped up and high energy. And it is because feeding them oats turns them into a different animal altogether. So the high protein is good in order to boost her up. But if you're feeling she's getting anxious, then it shows there was a difference. So definitely. But it could have also, yeah, it's really hard to tell. It's really hard to tell where it's part of how she was normally, or if the change in the protein content made a difference. And she could have got less agitated as she settled in, but maybe the high protein made it harder for her to settle as well. So who knows? We'd need a whole load of dogs with different situations in order to do a proper test, but that's the scientist in me talking there. And Marie says she's enjoying the bits and pieces. Thank you, Marie. Peggy is better on a high protein diet, but that's what she was brought up on. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it can make a difference. You know, if what they're used to makes a lot of difference. I'm doing a course at the moment on aggression. I'm only on module 2. It's pretty full on. We end up with 12 hours of video to watch a month, and so I'm already behind. But one of the reasons I chose to do this course is because she focuses a lot in later modules about the impact of gut health on behavior. And what you eat as a human and as a dog, what you eat influences the bacteria that live in your gut, and that influences how you digest the food and how you behave. So what they were brought up on affects the microbiome in the gut, which is going to have an influence going forwards. And I've also learned, in terms of humans at least, that what you are used to eating influences what's in the gut, because your gut bugs are better at digesting the foods that you tend to eat normally. So if you have something that you don't typically eat, you don't have the right bugs in there to help you digest it, and then you get indigestion. So it's all a bit of a vicious circle. If you don't eat it, you don't have the bugs, so then you try to eat it and you can't digest it. So where do you get the bugs from? But it's all wrapped up together. And I think part of the problem that we have quite often when a greyhound first comes home from the kennels is related to the fact that their digestion is not coping well with what they're being fed, and that's made worse by them being stressed. Excuse me. So Alison also likes the bits and pieces. Thank you. And Marie said her raw diet is very balanced and expensive. I miss out that word. Yeah, I was surprised because I remember seeing something coming up about raw diets on social media months ago now, and people commenting about protein or the balance. And so next time I was in the pet shop, I went and had a look down the freezer of all the at all the raw food. And yes, you can buy individual things. So if you just buy a bag of minced chicken or a bag of minced steak, obviously it's going to be different. But if you buy the products that are balanced, and a balanced one should have different proportions of different types of bits of animal, not just the meat, the muscle meat. And it's quite surprising that the protein is really quite low, lower than a lot of the kibbles. So I think there's definitely a bit of a message out there in marketing terms that says high quality is high protein. But I would say, yes, you want meat of some sort to be the first ingredient, but it doesn't need to be a high amount of it. And look at kind of limited ingredients of decent quality rather than too much. Anyway, so Steve said mine's raw is 60% meat and 40 veg. Yeah. And when you add in the offal and you add in the bone meal and all the rest of it, the actual protein content is lower still. So my last topic today, slightly strange one. This again was triggered by something I read on social media and just made me start thinking. And just before so Alison says she couldn't feed Emma raw because of her diarrhea. Yeah, that's her gut bugs weren't up for it. And she's glad because she's a veggie. Yes. I am too, but I still feed mine meat. I've never had a problem handling it. I just don't choose to eat it myself. If they want to eat it, that's fine. But I wouldn't necessarily want lots of it hanging around the house. I certainly wouldn't want to cook it. So my last topic is talking to your dog. I saw this on social media and it made me think, because I talk to them all the time. I'm probably a bit strange. And my mother was visiting last weekend and she said, it's really funny listening to you talk to the dogs. And she probably thinks I'm got a bit of a screw loose, live on my own with 5 dogs. And I chatter away to them in the way that other people probably would talk to the other humans in the house. So let me know in the chat, is this something you do? And I don't mean like give instructions, but do you have conversations with them? I think it comes naturally, and you can correct me on this if you disagree. I think it comes naturally if you've grown up with them, but maybe not if your first experience of being a dog guardian is as an adult. So tell me what you think about that. If you got your first dog as an adult, do you think you would naturally make conversation with them and talk to them? Or is it something you learn as a child in the way that you probably talk to your teddy bear as well, or your dolly or whatever, or your racing car or your action man as a child? Tell me what you think in the chat. I do tend to chat away to them. I talk sentences, I ask questions, I berate them for stuff. And I'm under no misconception that they understand the language that I am talking, but they do understand the tone of voice. So they know if I'm going out based on what I'm wearing and how I talk before I go. Not necessarily the words. I'm not saying stay or bed or giving a cue or a command even. It's more the tone of voice I talk to them in. And add that into my routine that I deliberately cultivate before I leave the house. It usually means, by and large, they settle down before I leave and they don't expect to come. So this thing I saw on social media was about talking to your dog before you do things. And I do this as well. So if I have to go down the garden and I don't want them to come with me, mainly because Floppy will just run down there and bark, I tell them that I'm going. Now you might think, oh, for goodness sake, just go. But if I tell them I'm going, they will stay in bed. Well, Floppy might come to the door, but by and large, that's fine. If I just disappear out of the door and close it, when I come back, there's going to be a gang of them at the door, like bouncy, bouncy, where have you been? What have you been doing? And the only difference was I told them I was going. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to tell them. So tell me what you think about that as well. Let's have a look at the comments. So Steve walks down the street talking to Manny like a lunatic. Yeah, I'm a bit that way as well. Embarrassing, isn't it? The Old Kit What Game says nothing strange about chatting to them woofers. How do you think the editor comes up with all the stuff? What you mean, the editor's listening to me chatting, or it's his own chatting? Yehuba talks to hers all the time, and Susie says my boy's got his own voice. In my head he sounds like Bennett Cribbins. Well, there's a challenge for the editor. David talked to all his dogs, and Susie replies on his behalf in Bernard Cribbing's voice. And Jeff says, I do too, for sure, unless they tell me to be quiet as you're talking too much. Well, yeah, there is that. That's a bit rude, isn't it? Telling you to shut up. Hi, Aurora Violet Light. You've not made the live again due to new working hours, but we'll have to catch up. Yes, it will be there to catch up with. Say hi. And Lee said, talk to my dogs all the time and they put pictures of treats in my mind. Oh, that's an interesting one. I think that's why I was thinking of toast the other morning, because the editor's not been here for a while and mine were sending me subliminal messages that said toast. And we had 3 slices of normal bread because I can't eat wheat, so I don't give them my expensive gluten-free bread. But I had 3 slices of normal bread that my mother left behind, so they had toast with that. And Denise says, one of my neighbours referred to me once as that lady who talks to her dogs. Yeah, that would be right. So it sounds like you guys all talk to your dogs just as much as I talk to mine. So now tell me in the comments, did you all have dogs as a child? Or did any of you only get a dog as an adult? Because what's interesting me is it something you pick up when you're little? Because I have found some of the people I've worked with, they don't talk to their dogs. And we've been out on a session and I say, talk to him. Yeah, because sometimes walking along, talking in a soothing manner helps the dog feel calmer. If they're anxious, I'm going to talk to them. And it's just about that little bit of noise in a reassuring tone that makes a huge difference. So tell me whether you had dogs when you were little, because I think we've established that everybody, everyone talks to their dogs. So while you're telling me that, I would go on to say that I would also generally talk to them before I touch them. And I think this is quite important. So as well as making sure I see the touches, they see the touches coming, I talk to them. And it doesn't matter what you say, but it's about them becoming aware of you or a person in their environment that's getting closer, because if you're talking to them, they can hear you, they're aware of where that sound's coming from before you touch them. So if someone crept up behind you and you didn't realize they were there and touch you, you would probably jump. And so do they. Now, I remember a time when I was at the kennels and I mentioned an issue with a problem with the dog's leg to a member of staff at the kennels. And this person just walked straight up to the dog, kind of didn't act like they were a dog at all. They could have equally have been checking the tyres on a car, to be fair. They grabbed the leg, lifted it up, pulled it out to the side and looked at it and bent down. And I remember thinking at the time that that wasn't a very friendly or calm way of dealing with it. Because if that dog had been frightened, if that dog had been in pain, if that dog had been surprised, their first reaction could easily have been to snap. So it was actually quite a good way to get bitten. And then whose fault would that have been? In my mind, that wouldn't have been the dog's fault because the dog was like, oh my God, snap. So being predictable is a really good way to help you build a trusting relationship with your dog. If you touch them unexpectedly, that brings uncertainty into their lives and that adds stress. They can't relax. Imagine if you lived in a situation where you never knew what was going to happen next and you had no control over whether or not it happened. It's not exactly relaxing. So talking to them before you touch them, being aware of where you touch them and whether that might be a sensitive place. Particularly, I think with feet and legs, maybe start by touching the shoulder and running your hand down, just as I would do to pick up a horse's hoof. Helps them know it's coming and it takes the startle out of it. So talking does make a difference. It's not just about weird lady talking to her dogs. It does serve a purpose. So let me know your thoughts about that in the chat. Is this something you've come across? And I'm going to have a look at some of the comments now. So where are we? So who's had dogs as a child? Yehuba didn't. Susie had a dog till she was 19. And her dad talked to the dog. And Steve grew up with dogs. And Lee had dogs as an adult, but still talked to them, perhaps only child syndrome. Yes, quite possibly. Did you talk to your teddy bear, Lee? Aurora Violet like spent all her life with dogs and constantly talked to them and has a new rescue. Yay! And Jeff had a dog, and David had a dog, and Mr. Piggy had dogs. So maybe it does answer my question. There's more of you had dogs as a child than didn't, by the look of it. Marie says, I got my first as an adult and chat to ours, but did grow up on a farm. So again, I wondered, did you talk to the farm animals as a child? Because you watch a child with a toy, they talk to the toy as if the toy could talk back. And you do see children talking to dogs like that or other pets like that as well. As if they're having a conversation with them. And I just wondered, does it grow out of that? Because when people get older, they kind of probably start feeling a bit embarrassed about walking along talking to a dog. And Marie always asks consent. That's good to hear. And Joy says, I can't imagine not talking to my dog. I've never had dogs when I was young. Okay. It seems natural to have a conversation. I quite agree. It certainly does. And Ginny says, there's only me. Where's it gone? There's only me and Madge, so I talk to her all the time. Yeah, maybe it's a living on your own thing. To be fair, when people are here, as from when I mentioned my mother commenting on me talking to the dogs, I talk to the dogs just as much when the people are here. So what did Ginny say? When we're in home, look, I talk to her all the time we're in home when we go on walks. So she could answer me back. She'd say, goodness gracious, give it a rest. Yes, there is that. And Aurora Violet Light said they're sentient beings, so I treat them with total respect and engage. Good for you. It's a way to do it, definitely. Alison had cavaliers, Denise and hubby had dogs, and Steve talked to plants too. I hope your plants are well behaved. Do they grow better? Do you like the Little Shop of Horrors? That's a very good plant there. Angie Hoover has very kindly sent us a donation. That is so kind of you. Thank you very much. I will get onto that wish list, maybe even this week. And I will buy them some treats. Yes, I will buy them some treats, and I'll let you know what I've bought. What I've bought them. Alison's always had dogs, and the old Get What Games always used to chat to Mr. Patch, who was his dog. And David says, I love to hear my dogs talk, but I have a feeling all he would say is biscuit. No, oi, biscuit now, go, where's the biscuit? Bless him. The old Get What Game says, my mother is just as bad at chatting to them. Yes, she does, but she's always busy telling Meggie how lovely she is. I think Jeff has watched The Little Shop of Horrors. Yes, Seymour. I did like that plant, and he was very good in the Audrey 2, or is it her? Is it a her? If it was Audrey 2, was the plant, wasn't it? Named after the lady that he wanted to have a relationship and wasn't interested in it. I did like that plant. Lynn talks to hers all the time. Yes, who wouldn't talk to them all the time, eh? So that's the end of my topics. We've gone on way longer than I thought I would do. So obviously 4 topics is quite enough. I'll be boring you all silly at this rate. So if you've enjoyed this month's bits and pieces, then I hope you will join me again on the 4th Monday of next month for bits and pieces again. Thank you to those who've made donations. You can do that on any of our videos or shorts. And of course, there is the option to become a channel member if you'd like to make a regular monthly contribution. We'll be back again next month in February with Hot Topics on the 12th. The Superfan Members Live is on the 19th and Bits and Pieces is on the 26th. And I will put community posts up about all of those as they come through, and hope that you can join me then. And if you have ideas for topics, please let me know as the posts come up or on any of the comments on any of the videos, because I will just make, I will just make notes as I go through and pull them all together. And then they'll go in one or the other, depending on how long I think I can rabbit on about them. That's the bottom line for my decision-making process. Is this a short rabbit or a long rabbit? And then you'll get them in one or the other. So a huge thank you to everybody for joining me this evening. And thank you as well for those who watch it on the replay later on, or even choose to go through and watch it again at another point. And I'm going to love you and leave you now. So enjoy the rest of your morning, your evening, your day, or have a lovely snooze if it's bedtime where you are in the world. And I'll see you again in February. Bye, everybody.